Briggy, the smell of two-stroke oil and cold metal had become as familiar to me as my own skin. I'd been running Thornwood's small engine repair for 11 years by that point, ever since I turned 23 and realized I'd rather spend my days elbow-deep in snowmobile carburetors than finish a business degree I never wanted in the first place. The shop sat on the outskirts of Rhinelander, Wisconsin, a corrugated steel building with a hand-painted sign my father made before he passed. Most of my work came from the seasonal crowd: ice fishermen with temperamental augers in winter, cabin owners with chainsaws that wouldn't start in spring, ATV enthusiasts year-round who rode their machines harder than the manufacturers ever intended. That Thursday morning in late November, I had 3 ski-doos lined up in the bay, all needing work before the heavy snows hit. The air had that particular crispness that told me winter was maybe 6 weeks out, and my regular customers were already calling, anxious to get their sleds tuned up. I remember standing at my workbench, coffee going cold beside me, trying to track down a fuel line leak on a 2019 Renegade when my phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "Still going up this weekend?" I wiped my hands on my shop rag, the one with the faded Green Bay Packers logo that my Uncle Frank had given me probably 15 years back. Yeah. Need to finish the porch railing before it snows. Her response came quick. "You've been up there 3 weekends in a row. I thought we were going to Door County. I hadn't forgotten. I'd been avoiding it." The cabin needed more work than I'd anticipated when I inherited it 6 months ago, and every time I drove up to Pelican Lake, I found something else that demanded attention. Rotted window frames, a water heater older than I was, mice in the insulation. Part of me resented the obligation, but another part, a part I didn't fully understand, felt pulled toward that place in a way I couldn't explain to Maria or anyone else. "Next weekend," I typed back. "Promise." She didn't respond for an hour. When she did, it was just a thumbs-up emoji that felt more like an accusation than an acknowledgement. I finished the Renegade by noon, moved on to diagnosing a clattering noise in someone's Polaris, and spent my lunch break eating a gas station sandwich while scrolling through hardware store prices for treated lumber. The porch railing really did need replacing. That much was true. But if I was being honest with myself, and I rarely was back then, I could have hired someone to do it. Could have paid a contractor to handle all of it and just collected rent checks once the place was livable again. That had been the plan, originally. Fix it up, rent it out, make a little passive income from city people who wanted a rustic weekend getaway. But Uncle Frank's note had changed something in me. He'd left it with the will, handwritten on yellow legal paper in his cramped, slanted script. I'd read it maybe 30 times by that September, and I still didn't know what to make of it. "Xavier, the cabin's yours. You spent time there as a boy, so you know the land. I'm trusting you to keep it watched. Don't let it sit empty too long. Don't sell it to strangers. The North Woods have their own rules, and someone in the family needs to remember them. Stay aware after dark. Frank." My mother had dismissed it as the ramblings of a man who'd lived alone too long. "Frank was always odd," she'd said when I showed her. "Spent too many years talking to trees instead of people." But she hadn't known him like I had. She hadn't spent childhood summers at that cabin learning to fish and shoot and identify animal tracks in the mud. Frank had been strange, sure. Quiet in a way that felt deliberate rather than shy. Watchful in a way that made you feel like he was always listening for something you couldn't hear. But he hadn't been crazy. He'd been careful. There's a difference. I locked up the shop at 5:30, drove my truck back to the apartment Maria and I shared, and started packing for the weekend. She was working late at the hospital. She was a radiology tech at Aspirus, so I left her a note on the kitchen counter and hit the road by 7. The drive to Pelican Lake took about 45 minutes, and I'd made it enough times by then that my truck seemed to know the way. Past the Walmart and the strip malls, past the last subdivision, then nothing but 2-lane highway, cutting through forest so thick the headlights barely penetrated past the shoulder. The cabin sat at the end of a gravel road about a quarter mile from the nearest neighbor, an older couple named Dale and Patty Hendricks, who'd known my uncle for decades. They'd been keeping Buckshot, Frank's old blue tick hound, since Frank passed. I'd offered to take him, but Dale said the dog was too old to relocate, too set in his ways. I think Dale just didn't want to give him up. I pulled into the clearing around 8:15, the last light fading fast behind the pines. The cabin looked the same as always. Single story, cedar siding gone gray with age. A field stone chimney that I'd have to inspect before I trusted it to hold a fire. I'd gotten the electricity working again on my second visit, so the porch light came on when I flipped the switch inside, casting a yellow circle onto the overgrown grass that passed for a front yard. That first night was quiet. I heated up a can of chili on the propane stove, drank 2 beers, and made a list of everything that still needed doing. The porch railing, the bathroom caulking, 3 windows that wouldn't lock properly. I fell asleep on the old couch around 11, too tired to bother with the bedroom, and didn't dream of anything I could remember. Friday, I started on the railing. The old one had rotted through in so many places that I ended up tearing the whole thing out, stacking the debris in a pile near the tree line for burning later. The physical work felt good, honest and simple in a way that engine repair sometimes wasn't. By late afternoon, I had the new posts set in concrete, and I was measuring for the horizontal rails when I noticed the deer carcass. It was maybe 50 yards into the woods, just visible through the underbrush. At first, I thought it was a pile of leaves, some trick of the fading light, but the color was wrong. Reddish-brown and gray, not the orange and yellow of autumn. I set down my tape measure and walked toward it, my boots crunching through dry ferns. The smell hit me about 20 feet out. That heavy copper-sweet rot that means something's been dead for a while, but not long enough to go dry. I covered my nose with my sleeve and kept going because I needed to see. I needed to know what I was dealing with. The deer, a doe, maybe 100 pounds, before whatever happened to her, had been dragged against the base of a white pine. Her hindquarters were mostly gone, ribs exposed and cracked, organs pulled out and scattered in a way that didn't look like feeding. It looked like destruction, like something had torn into her, not because it was hungry, but because it could. I crouched down, studying the marks on her remaining flesh. 3 parallel gouges ran across her shoulder, deep enough to scrape bone. I'd seen bear kills before. This wasn't that. Bear claws leave ragged tears, messy and imprecise. These marks were clean, deliberate, and they were too wide apart. I spread my hand over them and couldn't match the span. My first thought was wolf. We had them in northern Wisconsin, had for years, despite what some of the old-timers wanted. A big male wolf could bring down a deer, and they sometimes cached kills, dragged them to more secluded spots. But wolves didn't usually leave this much meat behind. And those claw marks, wolves bit their prey, they didn't slash. I remember thinking maybe a sick bear. Something wrong with it, something that made it kill differently. It was a stupid thought. The kind of rationalization you reach for when your gut is telling you something your brain doesn't want to hear. But I held on to it anyway because the alternative was admitting that I didn't know what made those marks. And that possibility felt worse than any explanation I could invent. I walked back to the cabin, washed my hands in the utility sink until my skin felt raw, and made myself eat dinner even though my appetite had vanished. That night, I heard the dogs. The Hendricks had 2 German shepherds in addition to Buckshot, and there were other properties within a half-mile or so, most with dogs of their own. After sunset, they all started howling. Not barking. Howling, that long, mournful sound that dogs make when something's wrong. It went on for maybe 20 minutes, rising and falling, echoing through the trees, until the forest sounded like it was full of grief. Then it stopped. All at once, like someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was worse. I stood on the porch, listening, waiting for insects, frogs, night birds, anything. But there was nothing, just the sound of my own breathing and the blood rushing in my ears and the vast, patient emptiness of the North Woods after dark. I went inside, locked the door, told myself I was being ridiculous. Saturday morning, I walked over to the Hendricks place. Dale was out front, splitting wood, and he set down his maul when he saw me coming. "Hey there, Xavier. How's the cabin coming along?" "Slow but steady," I said. "Hey, I found a deer carcass on the property yesterday. Something had gotten to it pretty good." "You have any trouble with predators lately?" Dale's expression flickered. It was subtle. Just a tightening around the eyes. A moment of hesitation before he spoke. I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching. "Haven't seen anything unusual," he said. "Bears are fattening up for winter, though. Could be one got bold." The claw marks seemed too big for Bear. He didn't answer right away. He picked up a piece of split oak, examined it like it contained some secret, then tossed it onto the pile. "Frank ever tell you much about the land up here?" he asked. "Some. Taught me to hunt when I was a kid, showed me the property lines, the good fishing spots." "He tell you about the other stuff?" My stomach tightened. "What other stuff?" Dale looked at me for a long moment. His face had the weathered patience of a man who'd spent 70 years not saying things he probably should have said. Then he shook his head. "Forget it. Probably nothing, just keep your eyes open after dark, all right? And if Buckshot won't come onto your property, don't force him." "What does Buckshot have to do with it?" "Dogs know things," Dale said and turned back to his wood pile. "They know things we don't." I tried to get more out of him, but he'd closed up. Gave me one-word answers, wouldn't meet my eyes. I walked back to the cabin with a cold knot forming in my chest, the kind of unease that settles into your bones and doesn't leave. That afternoon, I called the DNR to report the deer carcass. Figured it was the responsible thing to do. If there was a sick bear or a wolf pack causing trouble, they'd want to know. The officer who came out was a young guy, maybe 25, with a clipboard and an expression that said he'd rather be anywhere else. He looked at the carcass, took a few notes, and told me it was probably a bear. Maybe coyotes working together. "Coyotes don't leave marks like that," I said. He shrugged. "You'd be surprised what coyotes do when they're hungry enough. We'll make a note of it. But unless there's an active threat to livestock or humans, there's not much we can do. Just keep your trash secured. Don't leave food out and you should be fine." He was gone in 15 minutes. I stood where the deer had been. I dragged the remains farther into the woods, couldn't stand having them so close to the cabin, and stared at the claw marks on the pine tree, 4 of them, deep enough to have gouged through bark and into the wood beneath. They started at chest height and dragged downward like something had braced itself there while it fed, chest height on me. And I was 6'1". That evening I drove into town to a bar called the Timber Wolf that Frank used to drink at. I figured if anyone knew about predator activity in the area, it'd be the locals who spent their lives in these woods. The place was half full when I got there. Mostly older men in flannel and canvas, nursing beers and watching a Badgers game on the TV above the bar. I ordered a spotted cow and took a seat at the counter. The bartender was a heavy-set woman named Gina, who remembered me from previous visits. We made small talk for a while. The cabin, the repair work, how I was adjusting to life without Frank. After my second beer, I mentioned the deer carcass, the claw marks, the strange silence in the woods. A man 2 stools down set his drink on the bar. He was old, maybe 80, with a face like crumpled leather and hands that shook slightly when they weren't wrapped around his glass. Hershel, someone called him. He'd been listening without seeming to, the way old men do. "Those marks," he said. "How far apart were they?" I held up my hand, spreading my fingers as wide as they'd go. "Wider than this." Hershel stared at me. Something passed behind his eyes, recognition maybe, or fear. Then he stood up, left a 20 on the bar that more than covered his tab, and walked out without another word. I looked at Gina. She was wiping down the counter, not meeting my eyes. "What was that about?" I asked. "Hershel's got his stories," she said. "Don't pay him any mind." But I saw the way her hands tightened on the rag. I saw the glance she gave the door, like she was checking to make sure it was really closed. I finished my beer and drove back to the cabin in silence, the radio off, my headlights cutting through darkness that seemed thicker than it should have been. The gravel road felt longer than usual. The trees pressed closer. And when I finally pulled into the clearing, I sat in my truck for a long time, engine running, staring at the cabin and trying to convince myself that everything was fine. The porch light had burned out. I'd replaced the bulb just last weekend. I told myself it was nothing. Bulbs burn out. It happens. But when I walked up to the porch, I saw the scratch marks on the door frame. 4 parallel lines. Fresh, the pale wood beneath the gray, showing bright in my flashlight beam. They started about 7 feet up. I remember standing there, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to calculate what could reach that high. A bear on its hind legs, maybe. A very big bear. Except bears don't scratch like that. They rake and tear. They don't leave neat parallel lines. And they don't usually come onto porches. They don't test door frames. I went inside, locked the door, checked every window. Then I sat on the couch with Uncle Frank's old shotgun across my knees and waited for dawn. I didn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin settling, every gust of wind against the windows sent my pulse spiking until I could feel it throbbing in my temples. The shotgun, a Remington 8.7 that Frank had owned since before I was born, felt both reassuring and inadequate across my lap. I'd loaded it with double-aught buckshot from a box I found in the closet. The shells, old but still good. And I sat there in the dark watching the door and trying to make sense of what I'd seen. 7 feet up. The scratch marks had started 7 feet up. I kept running through possibilities, my mind grasping at anything that might explain it away. A bear. Had to be a bear. Black bears in Wisconsin could stand 7 feet tall on their hind legs. I'd seen pictures, heard stories. Maybe one had wandered onto the porch, curious about the scent of food or garbage, and scratched at the doorframe while trying to get its balance. That made sense. That was logical. Bears were smart, adaptable creatures. They learned to associate human structures with easy meals. But the marks hadn't looked like bear scratches. They'd been too precise, too evenly spaced. And bears didn't just scratch once and leave. They investigated. They tore things apart. They left more evidence, scat, tracks, displaced objects. The porch had been untouched except for those 4 perfect lines gouged into the wood. Dawn came slow, the way it does in late November when the days are short and the sun seems reluctant to climb above the tree line. I watched the windows go from black to gray to pale gold, and only when full daylight had flooded the clearing did I finally set the shotgun aside and stand up. My back ached from sitting rigid all night. My eyes felt like they'd been scoured with sandpaper. I made coffee on the propane stove, strong enough to strip paint, and drank 2 cups, standing at the kitchen window before I worked up the nerve to go back outside. The scratch marks were still there. In daylight, they looked almost mundane. Just damage to old wood, the kind of thing that could have any number of explanations. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the depth of the gouges, the smoothness of the cuts. Whatever had made them had claws like chisels, sharp enough to slice through weathered cedar without splintering it. I got a tape measure from my toolbox and measured the height, 6 feet 11 inches from the porch floor to where the marks began. Then I measured the spacing between them, 3 1/4 inches from the center of one gouge to the center of the next. I spread my hand against the wood. My own finger-to-finger span was about 8 inches. These marks suggested a hand, if it was a hand, nearly 14 inches across. The rational part of my brain kept insisting there had to be an explanation, a freak bear, some kind of escaped exotic animal, maybe even a person with some kind of tool, playing a sick joke on the new owner. But the irrational part, the part that had spent childhood summers in these woods, listening to Uncle Frank's silences more than his words, that part knew better. That part remembered the way Frank used to check the tree line before sunset, the way he never left the cabin after dark unless he absolutely had to, the way he'd sometimes stop mid-sentence and cock his head like he was listening for something only he could hear. Stay aware after dark. I spent the morning looking for tracks. The ground around the cabin was a mix of hard-packed dirt and patchy grass, not ideal for holding prints. But I walked the perimeter anyway, studying every depression and disturbance. Near the corner of the porch, where the scratch marks were, I found a partial impression in a bare patch of soil. It looked like a footprint, but wrong, too elongated, with what might have been toe marks that ended in sharp points, rather than the rounded tips of a human foot. I photographed it with my phone, then crouched there staring at it for a long time, trying to convince myself it was just a deer track I was misreading, or a dog print distorted by rain. It wasn't. I knew it wasn't. But I needed someone else to confirm what I was seeing. Because if I was the only one who saw it, then maybe I was just losing my mind. Maybe the stress of inheriting the cabin, the long weekends alone in the woods, the strain between Maria and me. Maybe it was all adding up to some kind of breakdown. That would almost be preferable. That would at least have a solution. I drove back to the Hendricks place around noon. Dale was sitting on his front porch, a cup of coffee in his hand, Buckshot lying at his feet. The old hound lifted his head when my truck pulled up, and I saw his nostrils flare as he caught my scent. Then he whined, a high, anxious sound, and pressed himself against Dale's legs. "Morning," I said, climbing out of the truck. "Got a minute?" Dale's expression was guarded. He set his coffee on the porch railing and stood up, one hand dropping to rest on Buckshot's head. The dog was shaking. "Something wrong?" he asked. I showed him the photos on my phone, the scratch marks, the partial footprint. His face went still as he looked at them, the kind of stillness that comes from deliberately suppressing a reaction. "What do you make of that?" I asked. He handed the phone back without meeting my eyes. "Hard to say. Could be a lot of things. Dale, those scratches start almost 7 feet up. And that print, look at the shape of it. That's not a bear. That's not a deer. I don't know what that is." Buckshot whined again. Dale looked down at the dog, then back at me, and for a moment I thought he was going to tell me something. I could see it in his eyes. Knowledge, pressing against the dam of his silence, wanting out. Instead, he shook his head. "I think you should go back to Rhinelander," he said. "Spend some time away from that place, clear your head." "I'm not crazy, Dale." "Never said you were." He picked up his coffee, took a long sip, stared out at the trees. "Frank wasn't crazy either. But some things aren't meant to be looked at too close. You understand what I'm saying?" I didn't. Or I did. But I didn't want to. "What happened to Frank?" "The doctor said it was a heart attack, but—" "It was a heart attack," Dale said firmly. "Found him in his bed, peaceful as anything. Nothing suspicious about it." "Then why are you acting like there's something you're not telling me?" He was quiet for a long time. Buckshot had stopped shaking, but the dog wouldn't look at me. Kept his eyes fixed on the tree line, ears laid back, every muscle tense. "Your uncle spent 40 years in that cabin," Dale finally said. 40 years of keeping watch, like his father did before him and his grandfather before that. The Thornwoods have owned that land since 1923. There's a reason for that. A responsibility. Frank understood it. You need to decide if you're going to understand it too, or if you're going to walk away. Understand what? I was getting frustrated now, my voice rising. You keep talking around something, but you won't just say it. What's on that property? What was Frank watching for? Dale looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't expected. Fear? Not for himself, for me. "Some things don't have names," he said, "or if they do, the names don't help. What matters is knowing how to live alongside them. Your uncle knew. I thought maybe you'd figure it out on your own, the way he did. But maybe some things shouldn't be figured out. Maybe they should just be left alone." He went inside after that, closing the door firmly behind him. Buckshot stayed on the porch, still staring at the trees, and when I reached down to pet him, he flinched away from my hand like I was made of fire. I drove into Rhinelander that afternoon and bought a trail camera from a sporting goods store. It was a decent model. Infrared flash, motion activated, good battery life. If something was coming onto my property at night, I wanted documentation, evidence, proof that I wasn't imagining things. While I was in town, I stopped by the library. I don't know exactly what I was looking for. Historical records, maybe, or newspaper archives. Something that might explain Dale's cryptic warnings about the Thornwood land and its history. The librarian was a patient woman in her 60s who helped me access the microfilm collection, and I spent 2 hours scrolling through old issues of the Rhinelander Daily News, looking for any mention of unusual incidents near Pelican Lake. What I found was mostly nothing. Reports of bear sightings, the occasional wolf attack on livestock, a missing hiker in 1987 who was never found, normal dangers of the North Woods, the kind of things that happened anywhere. Wild country bordered human habitation. But there were gaps, weeks, sometimes months, where issues seemed to be missing from the collection. The librarian couldn't explain it. Said the archives had always been incomplete, gaps that predated her tenure. And in the issues that did exist, I noticed something odd. The words unexplained and unknown cause appeared with unusual frequency in articles about incidents near Pelican Lake. A house fire in 1956, cause unknown. Livestock deaths in 1971, cause unexplained. A car abandoned on the road in 1994, driver never found. No explanation for why he'd stopped. None of it proved anything, but it added up to a pattern, or at least the suggestion of one. The Pelican Lake area had a history of things that couldn't be explained, and my family had been at the center of it for 100 years. I got back to the cabin around 5, the sun already sliding toward the tree line. I mounted the trail camera on a pine tree facing the porch, angled to capture anything that approached the door. Then I checked the window locks, brought in extra firewood, and made sure the shotgun was loaded and within reach. The silence started around 7:30. It happened the same way it had the night before. The distant dogs howling, then abruptly stopping. The insects and frogs going quiet. The forest holding its breath. I stood at the window, watching the tree line, and felt the weight of all that stillness press in against the glass like a physical thing. I don't know what made me go outside. Some combination of stubbornness and desperation, maybe. The need to see for myself, to confront whatever was out there instead of waiting for it to come to me. I grabbed the shotgun and a heavy flashlight, one of those mag lights that could double as a club, and stepped onto the porch. The night was cold, my breath pluming white in the beam of the flashlight. I swept it across the clearing, the grass, the edge of the woods. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Even the wind had died, leaving the air perfectly still. I walked toward the tree line. It was stupid. I knew it was stupid even as I did it. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to go back inside, to lock the door, to wait for dawn like a sensible person. But I kept walking, the shotgun heavy in my hands, the flashlight beam cutting through darkness that seemed to swallow it, just feet beyond its reach. I was maybe 20 yards from the porch when I saw the eyes. They were between 2 pines, about 50 feet into the woods. Just 2 points of light, amber gold, reflecting my flashlight beam back at me. My first thought was deer. Their eyes reflected light the same way, that eerie shine that hunters called eye shine. But these were wrong. They were too high, way too high. I'm 6'1". Those eyes were looking down at me. I stopped walking. The eyes didn't move. They just watched, steady and unblinking, 2 golden coins floating in the darkness at roughly 7 feet off the ground. My hands were shaking so badly the flashlight beam wavered, making the eyes seem to dance. Deer on a ridge, I told myself. There's a slope there. Has to be. The deer is standing on higher ground. But I'd walked those woods 100 times as a kid. I knew the terrain. There was no ridge there, no elevation change, just flat ground covered in ferns and pine needles, stretching back into darkness. The eyes blinked. It was slow, deliberate. Not the quick flutter of a startled animal, but a long, lazy closing and opening that somehow felt like a statement. I see you. I know you're there. I'm not afraid. I raised the shotgun. The eyes didn't move. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Me with the gun pointed at those unblinking points of light. My finger on the trigger guard. Every muscle in my body wound tight enough to snap. The eyes watching, waiting. Patient in a way that made my skin crawl. Then they dropped. Just sank down smoothly until they were at ground level, and then they were gone. No sound of movement, no rustling of underbrush, just there one moment and gone the next, like someone had flipped a switch. I don't remember running back to the cabin. I remember being on the porch, fumbling with the door, my hands shaking too badly to work the handle. I remember slamming it shut behind me and leaning against it, gasping for breath, the shotgun clutched to my chest like a lifeline. I remember sitting on the floor with my back to the door, telling myself over and over that I hadn't seen what I'd seen. Deer. It was just deer. Eyes reflecting light. An optical illusion, a trick of the darkness. There was nothing out there that stood 7 feet tall and watched me with the patience of a predator that knew it had all the time in the world. I almost believed it. I almost convinced myself. But I'd seen those eyes blink. The next morning I checked the trail camera. It had been recording all night, its motion sensor triggered by every passing moth and swaying branch. I scrolled through the footage on the small LCD screen, my hands still trembling from lack of sleep and residual fear. There were hours of nothing, dark frames interrupted by the occasional blur of a bat or the distant glow of fireflies. Then around 8:30, the camera had captured something else. The footage showed my clearing, the grass silver gray in the infrared light. At the edge of the frame, where the trees began, there was a shape. It was hard to make out, just a darker mass against the already dark background, but it was there, standing, watching the cabin. I tried to zoom in, but the camera's resolution wasn't good enough. The shape remained indistinct, a blur of shadow that could have been anything. A bear standing on its hind legs, a large deer, a person in dark clothing. But the timestamp said 2:47 a.m., and the shape was visible for 16 minutes straight, completely motionless, before it simply disappeared. One frame, it was there, the next it wasn't. No transition, no movement, just gone. I called Maria that morning. I needed to hear her voice, needed some connection to the normal world I'd left behind in Rhinelander. "You sound terrible," she said. "Are you getting any sleep up there?" "Not really. Listen, I think I'm going to stay another day or two. There's some stuff I need to figure out." Silence on the other end. Then, "Xavier, what's going on? You've been weird about that cabin ever since Frank died. Is this about the money? Because if you need to sell it, I support that. I've always supported that." "It's not about the money." I rubbed my eyes, trying to find words for what I was experiencing. "There's something on the property, some kind of animal, I think. It's been coming around at night." "An animal, like a bear?" "Maybe. I'm not sure." "Have you called anyone?" "The DNR? Animal control?" "I called the DNR. They weren't very helpful." I paused, debating whether to tell her more. She'd think I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy. But I needed to say it out loud. Needed to hear how it sounded when spoken instead of just rattling around in my head. Maria, the thing I saw, I don't think it's a bear. I saw its eyes last night. They were at least 7 feet off the ground. More silence. When she spoke again, her voice was careful, measured, the way you'd talk to someone you suspected was having a breakdown. Xavier, you've been spending a lot of time alone up there, and you haven't been sleeping. That can do things to your perception, make you see things that aren't really there, or misinterpret things that are. I'm not imagining this. I didn't say you were. I'm just saying maybe you need to take a step back. Come home for a few days, get some rest. Then you can figure out what's really going on. She was trying to help. I knew that. But her words landed like accusations, like she was suggesting I was weak, fragile, prone to seeing monsters in the shadows because I couldn't handle being alone. The frustration must have come through in my voice when I responded because she went quiet again. That loaded silence that meant I'd hurt her without meaning to. I'll be home tomorrow, I said. I just need to check a few things first. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise. I hung up feeling more alone than I had before the call. The cabin felt smaller somehow, the walls closer, the weight of the surrounding forest pressing in from all sides. I spent the day working on the porch railing, trying to lose myself in the physical labor, but my mind kept drifting back to those eyes. That patient, predatory stillness, the way they'd dropped when I raised the shotgun, not startled, not fleeing, just descending, smoothly, deliberately, like whatever was attached to them had decided to stop standing upright. I couldn't shake the image, couldn't stop thinking about what kind of animal could stand 7 feet tall, then drop to ground level in a single fluid motion. Bears didn't move like that. Neither did deer or wolves or any other creature I could name. But something did. Something that lived in these woods and watched cabins in the dark and left claw marks on door frames at impossible heights. That evening I positioned myself at the kitchen window with a clear view of the tree line. The shotgun was beside me. The flashlight was in my hand. I'd made coffee, strong and black, determined to stay awake all night if I had to. The silence came at 7:42. I checked my watch. The dogs started howling around 7:35, built to a crescendo, then cut off so abruptly it was like someone had pressed mute on a recording. The forest went still. The air went dead. I waited. For the first hour, nothing happened. The clearing lay empty under the rising moon, the grass silver white, the trees casting long shadows that shifted almost imperceptibly as the moon climbed higher. I found myself counting my heartbeats, measuring time by the pulse in my throat. Then at 9:15 I saw it. It emerged from the tree line at the far end of the clearing, maybe 100 yards from the cabin. At first, I thought it was a shadow, some trick of the moonlight through the branches. But shadows don't move. This did. It stepped out of the woods with a strange, hitching gait, and for a moment it stood at the edge of the meadow, silhouetted against the sky. The shape was wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. Wrong in a fundamental way that my brain refused to process, kept trying to fit into categories that didn't work. It was big, massive, easily 7 feet tall, maybe more. Its shoulders were broad and hunched, the posture of something that walked on 2 legs, but wasn't built for it. Or maybe something that walked on 4 legs, but could stand upright when it wanted to. I watched it through the window, afraid to breathe, afraid to move. The flashlight was in my hand, but I didn't turn it on. Some instinct told me that drawing attention would be catastrophic, that as long as I stayed still and quiet, maybe it wouldn't know I was there. It knew. Even from 100 yards away, I could feel its awareness of me. The way its head turned toward the cabin, slow and deliberate. The way it stopped moving and just stood there, watching. The moonlight caught its eyes for a moment. That same amber gold I'd seen in the woods, and they glowed like embers. 11 minutes. It watched the cabin for 11 minutes. I counted. I had to count. Had to do something to keep myself anchored, to stop myself from screaming or running or doing something stupid that would provoke a response. During those 11 minutes, the creature shifted. That's the only word for it. Its posture changed, flowing from upright to hunched to something in between, like it was uncomfortable, staying in any one position for too long. Its silhouette kept changing shape, taller, then shorter, then taller again. And the whole time, those eyes never left the cabin, never left me. Then it turned and walked back into the forest. Not ran, not fled, walked. Casually, almost leisurely, like it had seen what it wanted to see and was satisfied. The trees swallowed it, and just like that, it was gone. I sat at the window until dawn, the shotgun across my lap. My hands shaking so badly I couldn't have pulled the trigger if I'd tried. My mind kept replaying what I'd seen, trying to make it into something explicable. A bear, an elk, a man in some kind of suit. Anything but what it had looked like. But I knew. Deep down in the part of my brain that still remembered what it meant to be prey, I knew that what I'd seen wasn't any animal I could name. The shape had been wrong. Not just unusual, but fundamentally, impossibly wrong. The way it moved, the way it watched, the intelligence behind those glowing eyes. This wasn't a predator in the normal sense. This was something else. I thought about Maria, about her careful suggestion that I might be hallucinating. Sleep deprivation could cause visual disturbances, I knew that. Stress could make people see things that weren't there. But this didn't feel like a hallucination. It felt real in a way that made my skin crawl, the weight of those eyes on me, the patient, predatory stillness, the sheer size of the thing. Whatever was out there, it was real. And it was watching me. The next few days blurred together. I should have left. Every rational thought I had told me to pack up, drive back to Rhinelander, and never return. But I couldn't. The cabin was my responsibility now. Frank had trusted me with it, had left me that strange note about keeping the land watched. And despite my fear, or maybe because of it, I needed to understand. I needed to know what I was dealing with. I started researching. Spent hours at the library in Rhinelander, searching through old records and newspaper archives. Googled everything I could think of. Large predators in Wisconsin, unusual animal sightings, unexplained phenomena in the North Woods. Most of what I found was useless. Bear attack statistics, wolf population studies, blurry photos of alleged Bigfoot sightings that looked like nothing more than shadows and wishful thinking. But I also found the stories. They were scattered across decades, buried in local papers and online forums and obscure corners of the internet. Reports of strange creatures in the forests of northern Wisconsin and Michigan. Descriptions that matched what I'd seen. Massive, upright figures with the heads of wolves and the bodies of men. Eyes that glowed in the darkness. Claw marks at impossible heights. The common name was Dogman. It sounded ridiculous when I first read it, like something from a bad horror movie. But the descriptions were consistent across hundreds of accounts, spanning more than a century. Indigenous peoples had stories about such creatures going back generations. Early settlers had reported encounters. The sightings continue to this day, concentrated in the remote wilderness areas around the Great Lakes. I tried to tell myself it was folklore, mass hysteria, the human tendency to see patterns where none existed, to turn shadows into monsters and random noises into threats. But I'd seen it. I'd watched it stand at the edge of my clearing for 11 minutes, its shape shifting against the moonlit sky. Whatever name people gave it, the thing in the woods was real. The question was, what did it want? That weekend, I went back to the cabin. I don't know why. Stubbornness, maybe, or the growing certainty that running wouldn't help, that whatever was out there would just wait for me to return. Frank had spent 40 years watching that land. His father and grandfather before him. If the Thornwood family had some kind of responsibility to that place, then I needed to understand what it was before I could decide whether to abandon it. I arrived in the late afternoon, the autumn sun already sliding toward the tree line. The cabin looked the same as always, the new porch railing I'd built standing out pale against the weathered siding, the windows dark, the forest pressing close on all sides. I unlocked the door, checked every room, made sure the shotgun was loaded. Then I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the shadows lengthen. The silence came early that night. Maybe 6:30, earlier than before. The dogs didn't even bother howling. They just went quiet all at once, like they knew there was no point in warning anymore. I felt the stillness settle over the clearing like a blanket, heavy and suffocating. I didn't go inside. I don't know why. Maybe I was tired of being afraid. Maybe I wanted to prove something to myself. I sat there on the porch, the shotgun across my lap, and I waited. It didn't make me wait long. The eyes appeared first, between the same two pines where I'd seen them before. Amber gold, reflecting the last light of sunset, watching me with that patient, predatory intelligence I'd come to dread. I stared back, my heart pounding, my hands tight on the shotgun. "I see you," I said. The words came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. The eyes blinked, slowly, deliberately, just like before. "What do you want?" No response. Of course no response. It was an animal or something, not a person. But I felt like it understood. And it felt like those eyes were reading me, measuring me, deciding something. The eyes rose, not moved upward. Rose like whatever they were attached to was standing up from a crouch. They went from 6 feet to 7, 7 to 8. The points of light climbing smoothly against the darkening sky. Then they started forward. I raised the shotgun. The eyes kept coming. Thud, it stepped out of the tree line. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. The shape that had been a silhouette, the nightmare I'd convinced myself I was imagining, was real. It was walking toward me across the clearing, and in the failing light, I could see every terrible detail. The head was a wolf's head, or something like a wolf's head, but wrong. The snout was too long, the ears too large, the jaw too heavy. It was covered in coarse gray-brown fur that looked matted and dirty, and when it opened its mouth, I saw teeth that belonged in a museum of natural history. Yellow, curved, designed for tearing. The body was worse. It walked upright, but the proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, legs bent at strange angles, shoulders hunched forward in a way that made it look like it was about to drop to all fours at any moment. Its hands were hands, not paws, with fingers that ended in black claws at least 3 inches long. The muscles beneath its fur rippled with every step, and I understood with sudden, horrifying clarity just how powerful this thing was. It could kill me. It could cross the distance between us in seconds and tear me apart before I could pull the trigger. The shotgun in my hands felt like a toy, a child's pretense at protection, but it didn't attack. It just walked, slowly, deliberately, closing the distance step by step while I sat, frozen on the porch, unable to run, unable to scream, barely able to breathe. It stopped maybe 20 feet away. The eyes, those terrible, intelligent eyes, locked onto mine, and I felt something I'd never felt before. The certainty that I was being evaluated, judged. This wasn't a predator sizing up prey. This was something else. Something older and stranger than simple hunger. My finger was on the trigger. I could feel the cold metal against my skin. One squeeze, and I could put a load of buckshot into its chest. Maybe buy myself enough time to get inside, to lock the door, to survive another night. But I didn't shoot. I don't know why. Some instinct told me that violence would be wrong. That this creature hadn't come to kill me, not yet anyway. It had come to look, to see me up close, to understand maybe what kind of thornwood had inherited the land. We stared at each other in the gathering darkness. The creature's breath plumed white in the cold air. Its chest rose and fell with a slow, steady rhythm. And behind those glowing eyes I could sense something vast and ancient and utterly unknowable. A consciousness that existed outside human understanding, that operated by rules I couldn't even imagine. Then it turned, just like before, smoothly, without fear or haste. It walked back toward the tree line, its hunched form shrinking into the shadows between the pines. At the edge of the woods, it paused and looked back at me one final time. Those eyes, that patient, predatory gaze. Then it was gone. I sat on the porch until the last light faded and the stars came out, one by one, above the silent forest. My hands were still shaking, my heart was still pounding. But something had changed. Some understanding had passed between us, or at least I wanted to believe it had. The creature had come to look at me, and whatever it had seen, it had decided to let me live. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. Because I knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that this wasn't over. The thing in the woods had been watching the Thornwood land for longer than my family had owned it. It had watched my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my uncle, and now it was watching me. I was part of something I didn't understand. Some arrangement, some agreement, some terrible inheritance that Frank had tried to warn me about without ever saying the words. And until I figured out what that meant, I couldn't leave. Not really, not permanently. The cabin wasn't just a property, it was a post, a watching place. And whatever was out there in the dark, it expected the watch to continue. I went inside as the temperature dropped and the moon rose above the trees, checked the locks, loaded the shotgun, sat down on the couch with my back to the wall and my eyes on the door. It wasn't real, I told myself. None of this was real, but I could still smell it, that wild, musky scent that had washed over me when it stood 20 feet away. Animal and something else. Something that didn't belong in any category I knew. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow I'll leave. Go back to Rhinelander. Go back to Maria. Go back to my normal life. This was crazy. This was impossible. This couldn't be happening. But I knew I'd be back. The cabin was calling to me now the same way it had called to Frank all those years. Some things once seen couldn't be unseen. Some responsibilities once accepted couldn't be abandoned. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. Every time I started to drift off, I saw those eyes watching me from the darkness. Patient, intelligent, waiting, always waiting. I didn't sleep that night, not even close. Every creak of the cabin's old bones, every whisper of wind against the windows, every settling groan of timber had me gripping the shotgun tighter, my eyes fixed on the door. The darkness outside felt different now, heavier, more deliberate, like it was pressing against the walls, testing for weakness. The creature's face stayed burned into my mind. That long canine snout, those amber eyes that held something more than animal intelligence, the way it had looked at me, really looked at me, like it was reading something in my soul that I couldn't even see myself. And then it had just walked away. Let me live. Why? Uncle Frank's note sat on the kitchen table where I'd left it days ago. Keep the land watched. I'd thought it was the rambling of a lonely old man, maybe the early stages of dementia that nobody had noticed before the stroke took him. Now those words felt like a warning and a curse, wrapped together, a burden passed down through blood whether I wanted it or not. Around 3 a.m, the silence became absolute. Not the normal quiet of a winter night in the woods. This was that same dead silence I'd noticed before, the one that made my skin crawl. No wind, no settling sounds, no distant owl calls or the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Just nothing. I found myself holding my breath, straining to hear something, anything. The shotgun felt inadequate in my hands. What good was buckshot against something that could stand 7 feet tall and move through the forest like smoke? What good was any weapon against something that could decide whether you lived or died with a single look? The hours crawled by. I watched the windows lighten from black to gray to the pale gold of sunrise, and only then did I let myself breathe normally again. My muscles ached from tension. My eyes burned from not blinking. But I was alive, for whatever that was worth. I called in sick to the shop. Tom answered, sounding half asleep, and told me to take care of myself. He'd handle things. That was Tom. Reliable, steady, the kind of co-worker who didn't ask too many questions. I wondered what he'd say if I told him the truth. Probably the same thing anyone would say, that I was losing my mind, that the isolation was getting to me, that I needed to see a doctor. Maria called around noon. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message 3 times in a row. Hey, it's me, just checking in. You've been weird lately and I'm worried about you. Call me when you get this, okay? I love you. I love you. 3 simple words that used to mean everything. Now they felt like they came from another world, a normal world where people worried about normal things like jobs and bills and whether to get Thai food or pizza for dinner. A world where monsters didn't exist, where the darkness outside was just darkness and nothing more. I didn't call her back. Instead, I went outside. In the daylight, the cabin and its surroundings looked almost ordinary. Snow had fallen during the night, a light dusting that covered the ground in pristine white. Beautiful, really. The kind of scene you'd see on a Christmas card. But then I saw the tracks. They came out of the tree line, crossed the yard in a wide arc, and circled the cabin completely. I followed them with my eyes first, then on foot, the snow crunching under my boots. The prints were massive, longer than my own foot by at least 4 inches, wider too, with distinct impressions of toes and pads. Not bear, not wolf. Something that walked on 2 legs when it wanted to, but could drop to 4 when speed was necessary. The tracks came closest to the cabin at the bedroom window, right where I'd been sleeping the first few nights, right where I'd stopped sleeping after the scratches appeared on the porch. It had been here. While I sat on the couch with my shotgun, Staring at the front door, it had been circling the cabin, watching, waiting, testing. The tracks continued around to the back of the cabin where they paused by the storm cellar doors. I'd barely noticed the cellar before. Frank had used it for storage, mostly old tools and canned goods that were probably 20 years past their expiration date. The snow was disturbed here, packed down like something had stood in this spot for a long time, looking at the cellar doors, thinking about what was underneath. A cold deeper than the January air settled into my bones. This wasn't random predator behavior. This was reconnaissance, planning, strategy. I was being hunted by something that could think. The snow continued to the tree line, where the tracks vanished into the shadows between the pines. I didn't follow them. Some part of me knew that's exactly what it wanted, for me to venture into its territory away from the relative safety of the cabin where it could take me on its own terms. I went back inside and locked the door behind me. Then I called Maria. She answered on the second ring, relief evident in her voice. Xavier, thank God, I was about to drive up there. Don't, I said. The word came out sharper than I intended. I mean, don't come up here, please. A pause. What's wrong? Nothing, everything's fine, I scrambled for a lie that would sound believable. There's some kind of animal around. Probably a bear that came out of hibernation early. I don't want you here until I figure out what it is. A bear? I could hear the skepticism in her voice. In January? It happens sometimes, climate change or whatever. The DNR's looking into it. More silence then. Xavier, you're scaring me. You've been acting strange for weeks. Ever since you started going to that cabin, I think maybe you should talk to someone, a professional. She meant a therapist. She meant she thought I was losing my mind. I'm fine, I said. Really, I just need to handle this animal situation and then I'll be home, okay? Okay? She didn't sound convinced. Just, please be careful. I told her I loved her and hung up before she could say anything else. Then I sat down at the kitchen table with Uncle Frank's note and read it again, looking for any detail I might have missed. Xavier, the cabin is yours now. I know we haven't been close, and I'm sorry for that. There were reasons I stayed away from family, reasons I couldn't explain. But you're the last one left, and someone has to keep the land watched. Don't let it become abandoned. Don't ever let it become abandoned. I'm sorry to leave you this burden, but you're a Thornwood. You'll understand eventually. Frank, I read it again and again. Keep the land watched. Don't let it become abandoned. What did that mean? What had Frank been watching for all those years, alone in this cabin in the middle of nowhere? And why had he stayed? Night after night, year after year, when he could have just sold the place and lived a normal life. Because he knew. He knew what was out there in the woods. He'd seen it too. Maybe the same creature, maybe something even older. And he'd stayed anyway, kept the watch, held the post. But why? What was the point of watching something you couldn't fight, couldn't stop, couldn't even understand? What purpose did it serve? I didn't have answers. I wasn't sure I wanted them. The day passed slowly. I tried to stay busy, fixed a leak in the bathroom sink, organized the chaos in the living room, went through some of Frank's old things in the bedroom closet. Normal activities, human activities, things that kept my hands moving and my mind occupied. In the closet, buried under boxes of old clothes and moth-eaten blankets, I found something unexpected. A journal, bound in cracked brown leather, its pages yellowed with age. Frank's handwriting, I recognized it from the note, covered hundreds of pages in cramped, obsessive detail. I took it to the couch and started reading. March 14th, 1987. Saw it again tonight. Third time this month. Standing at the edge of the clearing watching the cabin. Bigger than I remembered. More confident. It knows I'm here. It knows I'm watching back. March 21st, 1987. Found tracks by the well. Circling the cabin, always circling, never approaching. Not yet. Testing the boundaries. April 3rd, 1987. Hershel at the bar tried to talk about it, said his grandfather saw something back in the 40s up near Sugar Camp. Said it's been in these woods longer than anyone remembers. Said the name, but I won't write it down. Names have power. Hershel. The old man who'd gone quiet when I mentioned the claw marks, who'd left the bar without finishing his beer. He knew he'd known all along. I kept reading. The entries spanned decades, thousands of observations recorded in Frank's meticulous hand. The creature's movements, its patterns, its behaviors. He'd tracked it like a scientist studying a rare animal, noting every detail with the precision of someone who desperately needed to understand. June 7th, 1992. It spoke tonight. Not words, not human words, but something that felt like words. A meaning that bypassed my ears and went straight into my head. Stay. That's what it felt like. Stay and watch. So I will. December 22nd, 1995. They want me to come home for Christmas. Ellen keeps calling, begging. But I can't leave. Not now. The creature is more active in winter. The watch must continue. Ellen will forgive me eventually, or she won't. Either way, the land comes first. August 14th, 2003. I saw its face tonight. Close enough to touch. That snout, those teeth, those eyes that hold centuries of hunger. It could have killed me. It didn't. I understand now. We have an arrangement. It watches me. I watch it. And as long as I'm here, as long as a thornwood holds the land, something stays balanced. Something stays contained. The journal went on and on. Frank's entire adult life documented in these pages. He'd sacrificed everything, family, relationships, any chance at a normal existence to keep this watch. And for what? Some arrangement with a monster he couldn't explain or understand? But there was something else in the entries. Something that made my blood run cold. January 6th, 2019. I'm not young anymore. The winters are harder now. Sometimes I can't feel my hands by morning, even with the fire going. I need to find someone to take over, someone from the family. The creature won't accept an outsider. It has to be Thornwood blood. Has to be. Xavier is the last one, young enough, strong enough. But how do I explain any of this? How do I tell him he's inherited something that can't be refused? I set the journal down. My hands were shaking. Frank had chosen me. Not because I was special or capable or even particularly close to him. I'd barely known the man. He'd chosen me because I was the last one. The only Thornwood left who could take over the watch. And he'd known somehow that the creature would accept me, that it would test me and judge me and ultimately decide to let me live the same way it had let him live for all those years. We were part of something ancient and terrible, a pact written in blood long before any of us were born. I wanted to burn the journal. I wanted to get in my truck and drive away and never look back. But I couldn't. The cabin had its hooks in me now. The watch had begun. Outside the sun was setting. Another night was coming. I found my uncle's old flare gun while searching through the emergency supplies in the hall closet. It was ancient, probably from the 70s, but when I cracked it open, the single flare inside looked intact. I loaded it anyway, added it to my arsenal. Shotgun, hunting knife, flare gun. Enough to make me feel slightly less helpless. Not enough to actually stop anything, if it decided tonight was the night. The darkness came fast. January nights in northern Wisconsin don't mess around. By 5 o'clock, the world outside was black as pitch. I turned on every light in the cabin, made a fire in the wood stove, tried to chase away the shadows. At 7, I heard it. Not scratching this time. Not movement in the distance. A sound I'd never heard before. A low, rumbling vocalization that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Not quite a growl, not quite a howl. Something in between. Something that vibrated through the walls and settled into my chest like a second heartbeat. I grabbed the shotgun and moved to the window. At first, I saw nothing. Just the reflection of the cabin lights on the glass, turning the outside world into a mirror of the inside. But then I saw movement, a shape separating from the darkness at the tree line, walking toward the cabin. It wasn't trying to hide this time. It was letting me see it, wanting me to see it. The creature moved across the yard in slow, deliberate strides. Upright now, fully bipedal, its massive form silhouetted against the snow. I could see the proportions clearly for the first time. The impossible breadth of those shoulders, the length of those arms that hung past its knees, the way its legs bent wrong at the knee, like they were designed for both human and animal locomotion. It stopped 20 feet from the porch, stood there in the moonlight, and I got my first real look at what had been haunting the Thornwood land for generations. The snout was longer than I'd thought, a wolf's muzzle stretched to accommodate a larger brain case, lined with teeth that gleamed white in the reflected light from the cabin windows. The ears were pointed, mobile, swiveling toward sounds I couldn't hear. The fur was thick and coarse, gray-brown in the moonlight, darker along the spine and shoulders. But it was the hands that made my stomach drop. Not paws, hands. 5-fingered hands with opposable thumbs and claws that curved like black sickles. Hands that could grip and tear and manipulate. Hands that were holding something. My trail camera. The creature raised it slowly, deliberately, letting me see what it held. The camera I'd set up days ago, trying to capture footage of whatever was out there. It had found it, taken it, brought it back. As I watched, frozen in terror, the creature's mouth opened in what might have been a smile. Those terrible teeth, that impossible intelligence behind the eyes. Then it crushed the camera in its fist. The sound of plastic and metal breaking reached me through the window. A small, pathetic noise against the silence of the winter night. The creature let the pieces fall from its hand, scattering into the snow like worthless garbage. A message. A warning. I know what you're doing. I know what you're trying to understand. And I won't allow it. The creature stood there for another long moment, those amber eyes fixed on my window, fixed on me. I could feel its gaze like a physical weight pressing against my chest, stealing the air from my lungs. It wasn't just looking at me, it was looking through me, seeing everything, every fear, every weakness, every secret hope that I might somehow escape this nightmare. Then it turned, walked back to the tree line, vanished into the darkness, but this time I heard it. The heavy footfalls circling the cabin, maintaining that steady, patient pace, not leaving, Not retreating, just circling, like a shark around wounded prey, like a predator that knew its quarry had nowhere to run. I didn't sleep that night either. By dawn, I was exhausted, wrung out, running on adrenaline and terror. But I forced myself to go outside to check the perimeter, to see what the night had left behind. The tracks circled the cabin 7 times, 7 complete loops, each one closer than the last. The innermost ring came within 5 feet of the walls, 5 feet from where I'd been sitting, clutching my useless shotgun, watching the darkness for any sign of movement. Near the back of the cabin, I found something worse. My truck. The tires were shredded. Not just flat, shredded. Deep gouges in the rubber, like something had taken its claws and torn through them with deliberate precision. All 4 tires. All 4 corners of my only way out of here. I stood there in the cold morning light staring at the damage and felt something inside me break. It wasn't just watching anymore. It wasn't just testing me or judging me or whatever else Frank's journal had suggested. It was trapping me, making sure I couldn't leave, forcing me to stay and face whatever came next. My phone, I needed to call someone. Dale, maybe. He had a truck. He could bring me new tires. Or Maria. She could come get me, take me away from this nightmare. But when I pulled out my phone, the screen was dead. Completely dead. I'd charged it last night, I was sure of it. The battery should have been at 90% at least. Instead, nothing. Just black glass and my own terrified reflection staring back at me. I went inside and tried the landline. Dead too. No dial tone. No connection to the outside world. The creature had been busy. I was trapped. No vehicle, no phone. No way to contact anyone or call for help. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles through dense forest, and I knew with absolute certainty that the creature was out there waiting for me to try, waiting for me to leave the relative safety of the cabin and venture into its territory. The hunt had begun, and I was the prey. I spent the morning fortifying the cabin as best I could, pushed furniture against the doors, nailed boards over the windows, did everything I could think of to make the place harder to breach. It felt futile. If that thing wanted to get in, a few pieces of furniture weren't going to stop it. But the activity kept my hands busy, and my mind focused on something other than sheer terror. Around noon, I heard a car on the road. My heart leaped. Someone was coming. Help was coming. I rushed to the front window and peered through a gap in the boards, hoping to see Dale's familiar truck or Maria's little Honda. Instead, I saw a pickup I didn't recognize. Old, rusted, with a gun rack in the back window. It pulled into the driveway and stopped, engine idling. Hershel got out. He looked older than I remembered from the bar, decades older, stooped and weathered by time. But his eyes were sharp as he surveyed the cabin, taking in the boarded windows and the barricaded door with a grim nod of understanding. "Thornwood," he called out. His voice was rough, phlegmy. "I know you're in there. Saw the signs on my way up. It's circling now, ain't it?" I didn't answer. Didn't move. Part of me wondered if this was some kind of trick, the creature taking human form to lure me outside. But that seemed impossible, even more impossible than everything else. "I knew your uncle," Hershel continued. "Knew your grandfather, too, back in the day. Good men, strong men. They kept the watch, same as those before them." He paused, spat into the snow. "But they didn't live forever. Nobody does. And the thing in those woods, it don't care about human lifespans. It just cares that someone's watching." I moved to the door, slid the barricade aside just enough to crack it open. Hershel stood on the porch, his breath fogging in the cold air. He looked tired, resigned, like a man who'd seen too much and couldn't bring himself to care anymore. "What is it?" I asked. My voice came out hoarse, cracked. "What the hell is that thing?" Hershel shook his head slowly. "Names have power. Your uncle learned that. Some things you don't name them out loud. Just makes them stronger." He met my eyes. "But I can tell you what it wants. It wants to be watched. Needs to be watched, maybe. Something about keeping it contained, balanced. Long as there's someone on this land, keeping eyes on the woods, it stays here, stays put. And if there's no one, if the land gets abandoned..." The old man's face went pale. "That's happened before, once or twice over the centuries. Things got bad, real bad. People died, whole families wiped out in a night." He swallowed hard. "The Thornwoods have been watching for a long time, son. Your great-great-grandfather made an arrangement, a bargain. I don't know the details. Nobody does anymore. But the gist is simple. Watch the land. Keep eyes on the woods. And the thing out there stays where it belongs. A bargain," I repeated. "What kind of bargain?" "The kind you don't refuse." Hershel looked toward the tree line. "It's watching us right now. Can feel it. Always could." He turned back to me. "Your uncle kept the watch for 40 years. Now it's your turn. That's how it works." "And if I refuse? If I just leave?" The old man's expression was answer enough. "Then it follows. Your uncle tried that once, back in '94. Got as far as Green Bay before it caught up to him. Brought him back here. Didn't kill him, but..." He shook his head. "Frank was never quite the same after that. Some lessons you only learn once." I felt the walls closing in around me. The cabin that had seemed like a burden, then a curse, was now a prison. And the thing circling outside was both my captor and my responsibility. "How do I survive this?" I asked. "How do I keep doing this night after night without going crazy?" Hershel reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather pouch. He pressed it into my hands. "Your uncle asked me to give you this. Said it was important. Said it came from your great-great-grandfather, passed down through the generations." Inside the pouch was a small silver charm on a chain, some kind of talisman inscribed with symbols I didn't recognize, and beneath it, a folded piece of paper covered in handwriting, even older than Frank's. "Don't know what it says," Hershel admitted. "Never read it. Wasn't meant for me." He stepped back toward his truck. "I should go. It don't like visitors. Gets agitated." "Wait," I called. "Please, I don't know what I'm doing. I need help." The old man paused with his hand on the truck door. His eyes were sad when he looked back at me. "There ain't no help, son. Not for this. Only duty. Only the watch." He climbed into the cab. "Keep your eyes open, keep the fires lit, and pray it stays satisfied with watching back." The truck pulled away, leaving me alone in the driveway with the pouch clutched in my shaking hands. Behind me, the forest pressed close, and somewhere in its shadows I could feel those amber eyes fixed on my back, watching, always watching. I went inside and unfolded the old paper from the pouch. The handwriting was faded, archaic, barely legible in places, but I could make out enough to understand. To whoever reads this, the bargain was struck in desperation. Our family had no choice. The creature had taken 3 of us already, and it would have taken more if we hadn't agreed. The terms are simple. A thornwood must hold the land, must watch the woods, must never let the post fall vacant. In return, it stays here, contained, bound to this place by whatever ancient magic governs its existence. But know this, it is always testing, always probing for weakness. If it senses you are unworthy of the watch, it will come for you. And if it finds you wanting no charm or weapon or prayer will save you. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never, ever look away. I read the words twice, 3 times. The paper felt brittle in my fingers, ready to crumble at the slightest pressure. A document passed down through generations, carrying a burden that no one should have to bear. But I was the last thornwood, the only one left. The sun was already setting. Another night was coming. And out there in the gathering darkness, the thing that had chosen my family long ago was waiting to see what I would do next. I put on the silver talisman, loaded the shotgun, lit every lamp in the cabin, and took my post by the window. The night came on faster than I expected. One moment the sky held streaks of orange and purple, the last defiant colors of a dying day, and then darkness swallowed everything whole. I sat in Uncle Frank's chair by the window, the shotgun heavy across my thighs, the silver talisman cold against my chest beneath my flannel shirt. Every lamp in the cabin blazed, throwing pools of yellow light that pushed back against the encroaching blackness outside. But I knew with a certainty that settled into my bones like winter frost, that no amount of light would keep out what was coming. The first hour passed in relative quiet. I could hear my own breathing, the tick of the old mantel clock, the occasional creak of the cabin settling on its foundation. Normal sounds, safe sounds. But beneath them, threading through like a dark current, was the absence of everything else. No crickets, no owls, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. The forest had gone silent, holding its breath. I watched the tree line through the window, my eyes straining against the darkness. The moon was only a sliver tonight, offering almost no illumination. Just shadows on shadows, the black shapes of pines standing sentinel against a marginally lighter sky. I thought about Hershel's words, about the bargain my ancestors had made, about the generations of thornwoods who had sat in this very spot, keeping the same terrible vigil. Had they felt this same crawling dread? This same certainty that they were being observed by something that existed outside the natural order? The talisman seemed to pulse with a faint warmth against my skin. I touched it through my shirt, feeling the raised symbols beneath the fabric. Whatever power it held, whatever protection it offered, I hoped it would be enough. At 9:47, I know the exact time because I couldn't stop checking my watch. I heard it, a sound that started low, almost below the threshold of hearing, then rose into something that made my stomach clench and my hands tighten on the shotgun. It wasn't a howl exactly. Howls have a kind of music to them, a wild beauty. This was different. This was a sound that didn't belong in any natural world. A vocalization that spoke of intelligence and hunger and something else. Something that might have been amusement. It came from the direction of the meadow. I rose from the chair, moving to the window, pressing my face close to the glass. My breath fogged the pain, and I wiped it away with a trembling hand. For a long moment I saw nothing but darkness and the vague shapes of trees. Then the eyes appeared. They were exactly where I expected them to be, At the edge of the tree line at the far side of the meadow, 2 points of amber light, catching some reflection I couldn't identify, burning like distant stars fallen to earth. They were high, so high at least 7 feet off the ground, higher than any deer, higher than any bear standing on its hind legs. They watched me watching them, and I felt the weight of that gaze like a physical pressure against my skull. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The shotgun felt useless in my hands, a child's toy against a force beyond comprehension. The eyes began to move, not toward me, not at first. They drifted along the tree line, disappearing behind a thick pine trunk, then reappearing a moment later, moving with a fluid grace that suggested something comfortable in its own terrible body, something that had moved through these woods for longer than my family had existed. I tracked its progress, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching as it circled the meadow like a shark around a wounded swimmer. Then it stopped. The eyes fixed on me again, and this time they didn't waver. I felt pinned, examined, weighed against some standard I couldn't comprehend. The talisman grew warmer against my chest, almost uncomfortably so. I wrapped my fingers around the shotgun stock, feeling the grain of the wood, grounding myself in something tangible, something real. The sound came again. That not howl, that vocalization that scraped against the inside of my skull. But this time it was different. This time there were shapes in it, almost like words, almost like language. I couldn't understand them, but I felt their meaning somewhere in the primitive part of my brain that remembered what it was like to cower in caves while predators stalked the night. It was calling to me. It wanted me to come out. I took a step back from the window, then another. My boots scraped against the wooden floor, and the sound seemed impossibly loud in the silence. The eyes continued to watch, unblinking, patient. It had all the time in the world. It had waited for generations. It could wait a little longer. But I knew, with a certainty that bordered on prophecy, that something was different tonight. Something had changed. Maybe it was the talisman, maybe it was my presence here after so many months of vacancy, maybe it was just the natural culmination of a process that had been building since my great-great-grandfather struck his desperate bargain. Whatever the reason, I could feel the tension in the air like the charged stillness before a lightning strike. Tonight, the watching wouldn't be enough. Tonight, it was coming for me. The first blow against the cabin wall came at 11:23. A massive impact that shook the entire structure, sending dust cascading from the rafters and causing every lamp to flicker. I stumbled, nearly dropped the shotgun, caught myself against the back of Uncle Frank's chair. The blow was followed by another, then another. A steady, rhythmic pounding that seemed designed not to break through, but to test, to probe, to find weakness. I ran to the window, looked out, and saw nothing. The pounding was coming from the north wall, the side facing the deepest part of the forest, but when I pressed my face to the glass, all I could see was darkness. Then I heard it. The scratch of claws against wood, a sound like knives being dragged across a chalkboard, and I understood. It was circling the cabin, testing the walls, the windows, the doors, looking for a way in. The scratching moved around to the east wall, then the south. I tracked its progress by sound, spinning in place, trying to keep the shotgun pointed toward whatever direction the noise was coming from. But I was too slow, always too slow. By the time I oriented myself, the sound had already moved on, and then it stopped at the door. The front door, the main entrance. The door I had reinforced with extra deadbolts after my first night of watching, thinking that would be enough. I heard the handle rattle, a soft, almost gentle sound, like someone testing to see if a lock was engaged. Then the pressure came. Not pounding this time, not scratching, just a steady, inexorable pressure that made the door groan in its frame. I could see it bowing inward, the wood flexing, the deadbolts straining against their housings. Whatever was on the other side wasn't trying to smash its way in. It was being methodical, intelligent. It was applying force at exactly the right points, exploiting the structural weaknesses that any door would have. I raised the shotgun, aimed at the center of the door, and waited. The pressure increased. I heard the wood begin to crack, saw splinters appear around the frame. The deadbolts held, but the door itself was starting to give. I had maybe minutes, maybe less, before it broke through. I fired. The blast was deafening in the enclosed space, and the door shuddered as buckshot tore through the wood. For a moment, one blessed, beautiful moment, the pressure stopped. I heard a sound from outside, something between a grunt and a snarl, and then silence. I didn't waste the opportunity. I ran for the back of the cabin toward the kitchen, toward the door that led to the storm cellar. Uncle Frank had mentioned the cellar in his note, had said it was the safest place on the property, the place to go if all else failed. At the time, I had thought he was talking about actual storms. Now I understood he had meant something else entirely. I had just reached the kitchen when I heard the front door give way. The crash was enormous, followed by a rush of cold night air and a smell that made my eyes water. Copper and musk and something else, something that registered as wrongness at a level below conscious thought. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. I just ran. The cellar door was set into the kitchen floor, a heavy oak hatch with an iron ring pull. I grabbed the ring, yanked upward, and threw myself down the narrow stairs. Behind me, I heard heavy footfalls. Not the pad of paws, but the deliberate, measured steps of something that walked upright, something that was in no hurry. I slammed the hatch I closed above my head and fumbled in the darkness for the latch. My fingers found it, threw it home, and I heard the satisfying click of iron engaging iron. Then I retreated down the stairs, my boots, finding each step by memory until I reached the cellar floor. The darkness was absolute. I had left my flashlight in the main room, left everything but the shotgun and the talisman around my neck. I pressed my back against the far wall, felt the cool damp of the stone, and waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. The silence pressed in around me, thick and suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat, my own ragged breathing, but nothing else. Maybe it hadn't followed me. Maybe the cellar door had confused it. Maybe the hatch shook, not violently, not with force, but with that same terrible patience I'd witnessed before. I heard the scrape of claws against oak, heard the subtle creak of hinges being tested, then a sound that made my blood run cold, the click of the latch being lifted. It couldn't. The latch was on the inside. There was no way, unless this thing could manipulate objects through sheer will, unless whatever ancient power animated it extended beyond its physical form. But the latch clicked again, and I heard it slide back. The hatch began to rise. Moonlight spilled down into the cellar. That sliver of moon that had seemed so dim before, now illuminating the darkness with silver clarity. And in that light, I saw it for the first time. Not just eyes, not just silhouette, not just partial glimpses. I saw it completely, and what I saw will stay with me until the day I die. It stood in the opening of the hatch, hunched to fit through the narrow frame, and even hunched it was massive. 7 feet of muscle and sinew, wrapped in coarse gray-brown fur that seemed to drink the moonlight rather than reflect it. Its body was wrong in ways that defied easy description. Shoulders too broad, arms too long, joints that bent at angles that made my eyes hurt to follow. It was like something had taken a wolf and a man and combined them without understanding how either was supposed to work, creating something that was neither and both, something that moved with a terrible fluid grace despite its impossible anatomy. But the head was the worst. The snout was long, canine, filled with teeth that gleamed wetly in the dim light. The ears were laid back against the skull, giving it an expression of hunger or rage, or something beyond either. And the eyes, those amber eyes that had watched me from the forest, now fixed on me with an intelligence that was utterly, horrifyingly aware. It knew what I was. It knew what my family had done. It knew everything, and it had come to collect. I raised the shotgun. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely aim. The creature watched me, its head tilted slightly to one side, almost curious. It didn't seem concerned about the weapon. It didn't seem concerned about anything. It took a step down the stairs. The talisman blazed hot against my chest, and I felt something move through me. Not courage exactly, but a kind of desperate clarity. My great-great-grandfather had made a bargain with this thing. Generations of Thornwoods had kept the watch, and now it was testing me, probing my resolve, determining whether I was worthy to continue the vigil. I fired. The buckshot caught it in the shoulder, tearing through fur and flesh, and the sound it made was unlike anything I'd ever heard. A scream that was almost human, almost canine, almost neither. It staggered back, one clawed hand pressing against the wound, and for a moment I thought I'd won. Then it laughed. I can't describe that sound. I won't try. Some things exist beyond the capacity of language to capture, and this was one of them. But I can tell you what it did to me. It took every scrap of hope I had built up, every fragment of courage I had gathered, and it shattered them like glass. The creature came down the stairs. Faster now, angry, no longer testing. I fired again, but my aim was wild, the shot going high, tearing chunks of stone from the cellar wall. I retreated, tripped over something in the darkness, and fell backward onto the cellar floor. The shotgun skidded away from me, vanishing into the shadows. The creature loomed over me. Blood dripped from its shoulder wound, spattering the floor inches from my face. Its breath washed over me, hot and fetid, carrying the smell of raw meat and forest decay. It raised one massive hand, claws extending, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was about to die. The talisman burned against my chest like a brand. I don't know what made me do it. Instinct, maybe. Desperation. The distant voice of ancestors who had faced this same moment and somehow survived. I grabbed the talisman, pulled it from beneath my shirt, and thrust it upward toward the creature's face. The reaction was immediate. The creature recoiled as if struck, a sound escaping its throat that was part snarl, part scream, part something else entirely. It threw one arm up to shield its eyes, and in that moment, I saw something I hadn't expected to see. Fear. This thing that had terrorized my family for generations. This creature that had stalked the northern Wisconsin woods since before European settlers arrived, was afraid. Not of me, not of the shotgun, but of the talisman, of whatever power it contained, of whatever bargain had been struck between it and the first thornwood to face it. I scrambled backward, keeping the talisman extended before me like a shield. The creature circled, its movements more wary now, its eyes fixed on the silver charm with an intensity that bordered on hatred. It was beautiful in a terrible way. This dance between human and monster, between the power of an ancient bargain and the primal hunger that wanted to break it. Then I remembered the flare gun. I'd grabbed it when I fled to the cellar. It had been in my hand along with the shotgun, clutched in my panicked grip as I threw myself down the stairs. I dropped it somewhere in the dark when I fell. I kept the talisman raised as I fumbled behind me with my free hand, searching the cellar floor where I'd stumbled. My fingers brushed past cold stone, something that felt like rope. Then they closed around a cylindrical object that I recognized instantly, the flare gun. The creature sensed the shift in my posture. It lunged, one clawed hand swinging toward my face with killing speed. I ducked, felt the wind of its passage inches above my head, and brought the flare gun up. The creature's hand punched through the air where my face had been, claws raking against the stone wall with a sound like screaming metal. I shoved the flare gun against its chest, against the wound I had already made with the shotgun, and pulled the trigger. The flare ignited. Fire bloomed between us, brilliant red-orange, burning into fur and flesh with a hiss that was almost lost beneath the creature's scream. It threw itself backward, flames licking up its shoulder and chest. And I saw something I had never expected to see. It was running. The creature scrambled up the cellar stairs, its massive body moving with desperate speed, and I heard it crash through the ruined front door, heard the heavy thud of its footfalls retreating across the porch, disappearing into the forest. The sound faded, swallowed by distance and darkness, until all that remained was the echo of its screaming and the smell of burned fur hanging in the air. I stayed where I was, pressed against the cellar wall, the spent flare gun clutched in my shaking hand. The talisman had cooled against my chest, its brief surge of power fading back to dormancy. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I realized I was crying, not from fear exactly, but from the sheer overwhelming enormity of what had just happened. I had faced it. The thing that had haunted my family for generations, the creature that my great-great-grandfather had bargained with, the monster that Uncle Frank had spent 40 years watching. I had faced it, and I had survived. But even as I clung to that small victory, I knew the truth. The creature wasn't dead. It wasn't even truly defeated. I had driven it off, yes. I had proven myself worthy of the watch, at least for now. But it would be back. It would always be back. That was the nature of the bargain. I stayed in the cellar until dawn, 7 hours huddled against the wall, the shotgun retrieved and pointed at the hatch, waiting for the creature to return. It didn't, but I could feel it out there somewhere in the forest, nursing its wounds, watching the cabin with those amber eyes, patient as ever. When the first gray light of morning crept through the hatch opening, I finally allowed myself to move. My body was stiff, cramped from hours of tension, and every muscle ached with the aftermath of adrenaline. I climbed the stairs slowly, expecting at every moment to see the creature waiting for me, expecting the nightmare to resume. But the cabin was empty. The front door hung from its hinges, barely attached. The frame was splintered, destroyed, and long gouges marked the wood where claws had torn through. Cold morning air drifted through the opening, carrying the smell of pine and frost and something else, something that might have been smoke or burned fur, or my imagination filling in details that weren't there. I walked outside on legs that didn't want to support my weight. The porch was marked with scratches, deep parallel lines carved into the weathered wood. And leading away from the cabin toward the tree line, I could see dark spots in the fading snow. Blood, already crystallizing in the morning cold, marking the creature's retreat. I followed the trail with my eyes, not my feet. It led into the forest, into the darkness between the trees, into the place where the creature had returned to lick its wounds and wait for the next night, the next test, the next opportunity to probe my resolve. I was shaking. I was covered in sweat and cellar dirt and flecks of something that might have been the creature's blood. Hershel's truck was still in the driveway. He must have fled on foot when the creature broke through the door, or maybe he'd hidden somewhere until dawn. Either way, his keys were still in the ignition. My hands were so unsteady that I could barely turn the key. I had to sit there in the cold cab, breathing through my mouth, trying to calm myself enough to drive. I made it to Rhinelander Memorial before noon. The story I told the ER nurse was simple. I had fallen through a rotten porch board, hit my head, bruised my ribs on the way down. She looked skeptical, but she didn't push. Small towns have a way of accepting convenient lies, especially when the truth would be inconvenient for everyone involved. The doctor who examined me found bruises covering most of my left side, minor abrasions on my hands and face, and what he called significant acute stress response. He recommended rest, observation, possibly a psychiatric evaluation. I declined the last one. What would I tell a psychiatrist? That I had been attacked by a werewolf? That my family had been locked in a generational bargain with a creature that defied rational explanation? That I'd driven it off with a flare gun and an antique talisman? I spent 2 days in a motel room in Rhinelander, lying on a bed that smelled like cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had happened. I thought about calling Maria, about telling her everything, about seeking some kind of comfort in her voice. But every time I reached for the phone, I remembered Hershel's words. Some things, once seen, couldn't be unseen. If I told Maria the truth, I would be dragging her into this. I would be making her part of the bargain, part of the watch, part of the endless cycle of vigilance that had consumed Uncle Frank's life. I couldn't do that to her. I loved her too much. So I lied. When I finally called, I told her about the porch boards, about the fall, about the minor injuries that were already healing. She was concerned, then annoyed, then resigned. I had been distant for months, ever since inheriting the cabin, and she knew something was wrong, but she couldn't see the truth, and I couldn't give it to her. We broke up 3 weeks later. She said I had changed, that I was keeping secrets, that she couldn't be with someone who shut her out. She wasn't wrong, and I had changed. The man who had driven up to Pelican Lake to fix up his uncle's hunting cabin was gone, replaced by something harder, more wary, more alone. I didn't contest the breakup. I just let her go. Selling the shop took longer than I expected. Small engine repair is a niche business, and finding a buyer who was willing to take on the inventory and the existing service contracts proved difficult. But by the following September, 8 months after the night in the cellar, the papers were signed and the keys were handed over. I walked away with enough money to start over somewhere else, somewhere far from the northern Wisconsin forests. I moved to Green Bay, not because I loved the city, but because it was south of Highway 29, south of the tree line, south of the place where the creature waited in the shadows. I took a job at a Penske dealership, working on commercial trucks and delivery vehicles, and I rented an apartment in a complex surrounded by concrete and streetlights and the constant hum of traffic. No forests, no silence, no darkness that could hide what was lurking inside it. The nightmares came every night at first. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, certain that amber eyes were watching me from the corner of my bedroom. I installed extra locks on my doors and windows. I kept a flare gun in my nightstand, loaded and ready. I slept with lights on, every light in the apartment blazing until dawn. The people around me noticed. My co-workers at Penske learned not to startle me, not to approach me from behind, not to mention hunting or camping or anything related to the woods. My neighbors complained about the lights that burned all night, about the sounds I made in my sleep. I moved twice in the first year, looking for apartments without too many trees nearby, without too much darkness outside the windows. I found a support group eventually. Unusual Experiences Support Circle, they called it. A collection of people who had seen things they couldn't explain, who had brushed against the hidden edges of a world that most people never glimpsed. I attended every Tuesday evening, sitting in a folding chair in the basement of a community center, listening to others tell their stories. I never told mine. Not completely. I talked about the anxiety, about the sleeplessness, about the vague sense that something was watching me. But I never mentioned the creature, never described what I'd seen in the cellar, never explained the bargain or the talisman or the generations of Thornwoods who had kept the watch before me. Some things, once spoken aloud, become more real. It's been 2 years now since that night. 2 years since I faced the creature, since I drove it off with fire and ancient silver, since I proved myself worthy of a duty I never asked for. I still own the cabin. I pay the property taxes, maintain the insurance, even hire a local company to check on the place twice a year. But I haven't been back, can't go back. And yet I know, with the certainty that lives in my bones, that I'll have to return eventually. The talisman still hangs around my neck. I never take it off, not even to shower, not even to sleep. It's become a part of me, a constant reminder of what I am and what I owe. Sometimes late at night, I feel it grow warm against my skin, and I know the creature is thinking about me, reaching out across the miles, testing the connection between us, because that's the nature of the bargain. A Thornwood must hold the land, must watch the woods, must never let the post fall vacant. I haven't abandoned the cabin, haven't sold it, haven't broken the agreement that my ancestors made. But I'm not there either. I'm not keeping the watch. And I can feel the tension building year by year, like a rubber band stretched too tight. Hershel died last spring. Heart attack, they said, though. I wonder if something else was involved. He was found in his truck, parked at the edge of the forest road that leads to my uncle's cabin, his face frozen in an expression that the paramedics couldn't quite describe. I didn't attend the funeral, couldn't bring myself to go that far north again, but I received a letter the following week, sent from his estate. Inside was a single piece of paper, covered in his cramped handwriting. Xavier, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Heart's been bad for years, knew it was coming. But I had to tell you something first. The thing in the woods is getting restless. I can feel it. The land is going wild, animals moving wrong, hunters seeing things they can't explain. It knows you're not there. It knows the watch isn't being kept. You can't run from this forever. Your uncle tried. Your grandfather tried. They all tried. But the bargain is the bargain, and the thing always finds a way to bring you back. Go home, Xavier, before it comes to get you. H. I burned the letter, held it over the gas burner in my kitchen, and watched it curl into ash. But burning it didn't make the words any less true. Some nights I wake up smelling copper and musk, even though my apartment windows are closed and locked. Some nights I swear I see amber eyes reflected in the glass of my bedroom window, watching me from a distance that should be impossible. Some nights I feel the talisman burn against my chest, and I know with absolute certainty that the creature is coming closer. Not tonight, maybe not this year, but eventually. The bargain is the bargain, and I am the last Thornwood. I keep a bag packed by the door now, filled with everything I would need to return to the cabin on short notice. Shotgun shells, flares, a satellite phone, supplies that could last me a week in isolation. I tell myself it's just preparation, just being ready for any eventuality. But I know the truth. I know that one night the talisman will blaze hot against my skin, and I'll feel the creature's will pressing against my mind, and I'll have no choice but to answer. Go home, Hershel said. The thing always finds a way to bring you back. I finish my shift at Penske every day at 5, drive to my apartment, and lock myself inside. I eat dinner watching cooking shows and home renovation programs, anything that doesn't involve forests or wildlife or the darkness between trees. I take my medication. The doctor prescribed something for anxiety, something to help me sleep. And I lie down in bed surrounded by light. But before I close my eyes, I always do the same thing. I touch the talisman. I feel its weight, its warmth, its connection to generations of Thornwoods who face the same impossible duty. And I whisper the same words every night, like a prayer. I'm still watching. I'm still here. Because that's all I can do. That's all any of us could ever do. Watch, wait, survive. And pray that when the creature finally comes to collect, the talisman will be enough. The silver is warm against my skin tonight. Warmer than usual. I think it might be time to pack the truck.